$50,000, $60,000, to buy a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment in a capital city. Taxes are low. Surprisingly, with the dollar strengthening, a lot of these emerging markets have really, their currencies have been kind of clobbered over the last 6 months, probably going to continue for a while longer. So actually the deal is even getting better. So I think that there's going to be some even increasingly strong opportunities to buy stuff and to live in places where your dollar can go incredibly far.
Hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you for Arcadia Economics. And today, fortunate to have a first-time guest on the show who was kind enough to write down a lot of the things that are happening now in a book in advance, which always wins bonus points in my heart. Also a good friend of mine, Dan Becker, who is the author of Towards Freedom, an investor, has some great insight into the gold, precious metals markets. We may talk a little crypto today too, so don't get your feathers too ruffled. But Dan, it is a pleasure to have you on here today and welcome you on in. How's everything going with you?
I'm having a great day. There's a lot going on, but it's good to be here with you.
Yeah, well, I, without revealing too many of the details, again, your book is Towards Freedom, but it's cool because you're not just writing about it. May I share a little bit of your adventures and how you're in your home now, which will in a week or so no longer be your home because you are, you can fill in.
Headed for Puerto Rico. Headed for Puerto Rico.
Yeah, and
even that is a much, then I think there are steps beyond that kind of go beyond that. So it's even a bigger plan beyond Puerto Rico. So that's kind of an exploratory step. So yeah.
Well, it's nice because, you've been seeing the stuff with the Fed, the inflation, government, the financial racket that they call our Wall Street system. But you've actually been taking action. And I know one of the things a lot of people struggle with is it's like, all right, I see that the Fed's printing, the banks are doing this and doing that, but it's a challenge. How do people actually respond? It's nice because really what you're doing and what's in the book is your own response for sovereign freedom. So maybe you could walk us through how that all gets started and some of the things that people would be well served to know are options that I know you've told me about and I didn't know about, so I think people are hearing of.
Yeah, so I think it just came down to really feeling like I wanted to kind of take things into my own hands. And I felt like that, the political situation, the money situation was unlikely to change in the way that I thought it needed to. But what I found, I suppose I've been thinking about kind of internationalizing myself and moving to much more of an international focus for, at least 6 years. And I thought, so I started doing some exploration. I hired a consultant a couple of years ago, the Nomad Capitalist, who helped me. And we came up with a plan. So since that time, I've gotten a residence card in the country of Mexico, a residence card in the country of Georgia. I've done some investing in Georgia, and I probably will do, I think I'm gonna have to switch my citizenship focus. The original idea was that, that Georgia would become a passport at some point. And I'm not sure that's gonna happen. It seems like the appetite in Georgia for foreign investors has cooled off a tiny bit. So I'll probably come up with another plan there. Mexico is still on track. Mexico is a great option as far as a passport go. It's kind of like the gold standard of pure tier B passports. So the passport is part of it. I think it gives you some options in terms of, no one country controls your movement or what you can do, and it opens up some ideas, where you can be. So I'm definitely thinking about, how I can move essentially all of my investments out of the United States and be much more globally focused. I might have some stuff here, but that's really the plan, to really seize freedom. And I think that there are opportunities to really do things and be treated better in the world than you can be here. What do you think of that? How's that sound?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, especially for I don't know, people like me who grew up in the US where it's a very rigid way of thinking, and the idea perpetrated that, you know, the US is great, every other country is, you know, some lower form of human, which
Mhm.
always seemed a little bizarre. And I think part of why you had that for such a long time is that when you actually do good things and you have a good economy because you're allowing entrepreneurs to function rather than what we're doing now, then anywhere that those conditions exist, I think good things will happen. At least that was my conclusions from Austrian economics. So what are some of, now you mentioned Georgia, and to be clear, that's Georgia, the country, not the state.
Yes,
Dan, you got to remember, folks like me who went to a
right.
government public school. You know, we don't always know about some of these countries, but you know, where are some places? You mentioned a few of them, but in terms of if people want to take what they've earned, their savings, their family, and go somewhere where it's not what a lot of us are concerned about here, what are some of the things you found?
Well, I think that I hadn't heard of. I'd heard of Georgia when I started, when my consultant mentioned it, but it wasn't on my list of possibilities. It actually turns out to be a fantastic place. I've been there 5 times over the last couple of years. But in addition to that, I think what I think that really did for me was one thing. It really ignited a curiosity to really take things to the next level. So there's a long list of places that I want to go and explore, like Montenegro and some places in Eastern Europe, places I'd like to go to Singapore and Monaco. Those places they've kind of sailed on they're not really value locations anymore, but I'd like to experience, you know, Dubai and places like this. So I think there'd be some exploration there, kind of seeing what those places are like. I'd like to go to Kuala Lumpur. There's a lot of places in that portion of the world. I'm also very interested in some stuff that's happening in the Caribbean and Central America. They have a project, the Free Cities Project. There's a project in Honduras called Prospera, which I'm very interested in. It would consider, you know, buying a house there. That's actually started. There should be breaking ground in either this year, it's probably later this year. So they're taking pre-sales on those houses. That's going to be a very interesting. They have a whole complete, very innovative and legal structure. That's completely based on English and American law. Going to be quite a good business environment. So I think it's about really exploring and really kind of just continuing to look around. I've been gathering a lot of data and trying to develop a short list of places that I think have good value. I think controlling expenses and being in places where the values haven't really sailed is very important to me.
Yeah, that's it's a good point you mentioned, because are there still some places, I think 20 years ago was a little different, where if you didn't actually need a enormous pile of dollars saved, and there were certain countries you could go to with, and your money would stretch a lot longer, and you know, you'd have your rent and food paid for $1,000 a month. Are there still places like that people
There
can
are
find?
there are lots of places like that. I mean, I'm amazed, you know, what I can get in Mexico. I mean, I talk to expats down there when I've been in Mexico, and in Mexico, you know, you got to be kind of careful. You pick your certain cities, and you're fine. I've spent most of my time has been in Merida, but I've looked at and talked with people. They'll have like an English library there, and I go there and you bump into English speaking people. I talked to a Canadian guy there. He was telling me about what things cost him in Canada, and he's well, I can come to Merida here, and he bought a house that was a fine house, but it just didn't cost very much, and his water bill was, you know, $6 a month or something, and you just went on down the list. The food you can buy in Merida, if you stay out of the, you know, touristy restaurants, you know, go a little bit off the beaten path, it costs practically nothing. Same thing in Georgia. I mean, I bought 4 apartments in Georgia. 3 of them were three. They all needed rehab. So, but you know, $50,000-$60,000, you know, to buy a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment in a capital city. I mean, if you wanted to buy even a really in New York or Chicago or LA or Berlin or London, anywhere you wanted, you'd have to pay, you know, 8-10 times that amount. But in Tbilisi, you can buy that for a fraction of the cost. You can go out. I can buy a sandwich at lunch for and a drink and something to go with it for like $3 or $4.
Wow.
Tbilisi at a nice cafe. You know, it's just the utility expenses are low, taxes are low in these places. They have a, you know, the Mexicans, they don't tax you if you don't, unless you make money in Mexico. They don't tax you. Pay very low property taxes in Tbilisi. There's lots of other places where you can go like that. Surprisingly, with the dollar strengthening, a lot of these emerging markets have really, their currencies have been kind of clobbered over the last 6 months, probably going to continue for a while longer. So actually the deal is even getting better. So I think that there's going to be some even increasingly strong opportunities to buy stuff and to live in places where your dollar can go incredibly far. So that's what I want to do. One of my big things is to really reduce my living expenses. And certainly one of those things is to see what I can do with taxes. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there. If you're a typical American and you're paying, you know, 45% of your productivity in taxes, could you get that number down to 12 or 15%? I think you can. And I don't think it's that hard. And there's a lot of options that certainly I want to go check out. Also, I think it's also important to figure out, you know, what feels right to you. And, you know, some places you probably go and, you know, they may have low taxes and it may be great for some people, but for some reason it's not right for you. And so I'm just going to go check them all out over the next 3 years with Justine. My kids are all kind of out of the house now, so we can do it. And that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, well, you got me excited. I mean, as you're sitting there talking, I'm thinking about taking my bag of junk silver, getting on a plane. And I mean, imagine if rather than paying taxes so that U.S. government could go blow stuff up,
Right.
Apparently get involved in a whole sort of nefarious things that some of which, I toss my silver bag down, jingle, some of which, again, you mentioned in the book, and I have some things to get into, but it's actually interesting because as you were saying, I'm thinking, gee, if you took all that tax money, loaded up on some quality mining stocks, I'm not giving financial advice here, I'm just daydreaming, and then go somewhere where you have a lower cost of living. And that's the thing, though. It's like people think it's, you know, that investors like Trump or don't like Trump, or yeah, but it's people like do work hard and spend their life sharing something. I mean, most businessmen, you know, you do well by offering something of value to people, and they're gonna, I mean, it's natural that people want to go where that's protected rather than, you know, a lot of the stuff that we see happen. So fortunately, I would like to point out, and if I can find the right page here, again, you're not just saying this now while the Federal Reserve is officially embarked in a hyperinflation campaign. I've thought of like how to phrase these things. I very much don't want to get people feeling anxious or anything like that. But I mean, when you have unlimited printing, so last month they decided they're going to print so much they can't put a number on it. It's like we're not a trillion a month because we might need more. And then this week, Powell comes out and says he's concerned about the outlook. Aggressive action might be needed. So, and you write here, inflation represents the greatest theft of all time. You don't understand inflation, you don't understand the game, and there should be no confusion as to the principal cause of wealth disparity. Unfortunately, there is a lot of confusion, and I think that's never been a more timely concept. In fact, someone was asking me the other day, what does it really mean, inflation? So if you could explain that, I think it's really relevant given what's happening now.
Yeah, well, you know, we've had a little over 100 years now of inflation. It looks very normal to us. I mean, every inflation has really touched everything around us, from the types of houses that we live in to the way the government operates and what the economy looks like, and what the stock market looks like. These things are heavily inflated, and right now we see them spooling up the monetary press to try to keep the thing from deflating and falling in upon itself. And it's amazing how much money that is taking to kind of paper over these holes that have emerged in in the market. But no, when you and it's very complex. It's I think it's strange. I expect that we're going to have deflation and inflation at the same time, and that we're going to really have a lot of change in the relationships between assets. Certainly, right now we're having a lot of monetary inflation. It's inflating certain sections of the stock market, and others may suffer from deflation. If they're not primed to get any of this money, if it's in the Russell 2000, for instance, you might see deflation in that sector of the economy because they're not going to get bailed out. But the S&P 500 and other sectors like that probably going to be inflated because they are going to get bailed out. Same thing with the bond market. You see, we're going to really support the corporate sector and the high, liquid and high quality, maybe even down to Ford and IBM and that kind of stuff. But the junk bonds probably not so much. They're gonna probably deflate a little bit. So it's very complex. Your inflation is different than my inflation because we buy different things. But in general, yeah, there's a huge amount of inflation, and nobody talks about the consequences of this and what this does to most of the people out there. Like you said, 99.999% of the people are really harmed by this kind of stuff. You have a cash cannon that's really fired right into the heart of a very small group of people around the world, and it continues to happen. It's happening in a really big way right now.
Yeah, I mean, I'll admit, certainly I've been doing this for 10, 11 years, and I've been surprised. I mean, we've seen prices go up, although I would have thought, in fact, I wondered when the Fed unleashed their kitchen sink a couple of months ago, if we would start pretty quickly seeing price increases. And I haven't noticed that yet, at least here in Denver. And, maybe you have the effects of Corona where there's some slowdown in the economy, balancing that out for now. Although it's scary that the Fed, I mean, it's almost like it's become a Mickey Mouse cartoon where it's like, I don't know if they're actually doing what they're saying they're doing, but I mean, if they are, I mean, it's past any semblance. There's not, is it possible to construct an argument that if you took US off the name and called it any other country and examined the finances, that it wouldn't be a junk credit already?
I don't think so. I think it is. I'm always amazed that I wouldn't buy it, and I don't know who does. I guess that's why the Fed has to, right? They couldn't sell this quantity of paper on to true investors, could they?
No, and in fact, it's funny because we had these mortgage bonds, and I think people got that they were junk, but I don't think it's clear often where, if a bond trades some amount of cents on the dollar, well, if it's 90 cents on the dollar, you're getting 90% of it. A lot of these mortgage bonds were no bid. So, you didn't have banks saying like, all right, well, I'll pay 1 penny on the dollar, maybe there's some value. No one was willing to pay anything except for the Fed. And I believe in many cases they were paying like 90 cents on the dollar. So, I mean, that was another bailout. Again, on page 42 of the book, I love that. Although, Dan, I mean, you're going to have to update it. The numbers are getting bigger here. As you mentioned, over $14 trillion worth of negative interest rate government bonds exist in the world. I didn't even realize you said government bonds. That's not even corporate, because now we have negative yielding junk bonds. And fortunately, and one of the things I love about the book is that for anyone, if this is new, you explain it the way people can understand, as you mentioned here. In other words, if you lend money to the government X, you pay government X interest as well. This system makes no economic sense, points to major distortions. And also mentioned U.S. government alone currently holds over $210 trillion in debt and unfunded liabilities.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, who could believe this? How could you come up with this kind of stuff? There's something really messed up. I think in 2008, if the economy were a car, it blew one of its rods out through the hood. And they put in a lot of money at the time, and they kind of kept it going. And here, just in the last 2 months, we've maybe shot another 2 rods out through there, and now they're really going for it. They're really, the system is really spooling up to try to keep this this debt-based system going. So, and you know, it's clearly, you see all these crazy decisions being made. It seems like they're kind of made on the fly, like, well, maybe this will work, and then these crazy numbers come out, but nobody knows quite how, what's the third effect of this? What's the third? What do you I did this, now I'm committed to this, and it gets really complex, and I don't, it doesn't seem like a sustainable solution. I have a feeling that maybe the proposed fix is really the disease. I think that actually the correction that is trying to be made is actually the fix, and they are actually flipped. What our government and the Fed are calling the fix is actually the disease.
Well, that's a darn interesting point you mentioned there, Dan. Unfortunately, I have the perfect page pulled up because I don't know, certainly for most of my life, I believe, you know, all right, these guys are, certainly when I was 5 years old, anything I knew of government, these guys are the ones who protect us, keep us safe. Then maybe I was a little busy drinking beer in high school to be thinking about those things then. Excuse me. And kids, I don't know if we should follow. We'll leave aside all these other government rules. I don't know if 21 is the age when you should or shouldn't drink. So, but you know, then the years go by, and there's an invasion of Iraq. Then you know, you have September 11th. You have a war of weapons of mass destruction that not only did they not exist, but there's clear documentation. People can look this up for themselves. Don't take my word for it. That they knew they didn't exist. And as you write here, also on page 42, maybe you can make like a download of page 42. That was a good one. I believe it's a lucky number too. So you mentioned George Bush, Dick Cheney, Barack Obama, and Hillary Clinton lied their way into wars, dropped hundreds of thousands of bombs, and killed millions of people. Nevertheless, they enjoy their freedom, while those who report the crime, such as Chelsea Manning, Ed Snowden, Julian Assange, are on the run or in jail. And especially with some of the things that are coming to light now, I try to keep this an economic themed show, yet I mean, it's hard to not see how these things are connected, where when you lie directly about the cause and then kill millions of people, normally that's called murder.
Mm-hmm.
But in many cases, these people are still celebrated, and are many of the same folks that are still running what's happening now. Is that right? Or
absolutely. There's you know, we see people continuing, CIA people, FBI people continuing to lie very recently to Congress and to people. It's amazing. You know, it's yeah. I don't know what else to say about that. But I think the rule of law is not so strong in the United States as it used to be. It's really as much of we were talking a little bit ago about, you know, why I'm kind of thinking like, well, is this really the place, you know, where I want to be? And I guess the question kind of I ask myself sometimes is, you know, fundamentally, do I trust the system? Do I trust it to be fair? Do I trust it to be, can I get a fair shake? Or is it, if some bureaucrat or some tax collector or somebody decides, you know, that I'm on the wrong list, can I be hassled, and do I want to subject myself to that? You know, so that, I think the answer for me has been increasingly, no, I really don't trust the system. So it's not, we were talking about taxes earlier, that's part of it, but it's also, this is a big part of the reason why I like, I really have questions about that. I would say, you know, we've been talking about this as a slightly going back to the internationalization idea, but if I write another project, and I do have an idea to write a next short book like this, I think I might call it Finding America, and it would be about my quest as I go through and explore around the world. You know, where can I find American principles and ideas, which are values that I hold deeply and seek around the world, And sadly enough, I don't think you find that here anymore. So it's about, I thought about calling the idea leaving America, but that sounded negative. And I thought, you know what, what's really much more positive is like, how am I going out into the world and finding the principles of rule of law and safety and nonviolence and free markets and freedom, and where can you find those things in the world, and how can you maximize your exposure to those ideas?
Yeah, and that's one of the things I love about you, Dan. And even the way you phrase it, how it's not a matter of trying to be negative, and it's not people's savings or investments like or don't like this or that. People are going to protect themselves and do, and seek to maximize. And it's actually a lot of what you
Your
spoke
leaders
about.
are.
What's that?
Your leaders do that. They're maximizing and protecting themselves quite well.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's unfortunate then they leave behind the rules. That was actually where this came from. Arcadia, it was a sequence of these 5 paintings in the course of empire where it shows, the temples build up, but and I wonder if it maybe is a state of mind wherever we are, if we can adopt these things. And sometimes we do move physically, but, just again, I think most people want to take care of their family, enjoy their time on the earth, and treat people well. So Dan, I really appreciate you coming on the show. Also that you wrote the book Towards Freedom, which in a second you can mention how people can get. Although I know you've been kind enough, you're going to give away a few copies for anyone who takes this interview link, and copies are at Arcadia Economic and your Twitter handle, and shares the interview.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, my I think I'm at CMI Dan. I use on Twitter, and then I've got a blog where you can read the articles just on the blog, or we have changemoneychangeeverything.com, and you can go there. And if you want to buy a physical copy of the book, you can do that. And there it is, and feel free to do that. Oh, by the way, I created a coupon code only for Arcadia Economics viewers. If you type in when you on the checkout page, it says, hey, have you got a coupon? You apply a coupon, just put in Arcadia, all in lowercase letters, and you get $8 off. So it's like $3.99. So it's basically just cuts, just costs portion of the cost of production, and then there's a little bit of a shipping charge. But yeah, I just love to get the ideas out there and interface with people on this kind of stuff. So that'd be awesome.
Yeah, and I love that in the page there, you even mentioned Austrian economics. I don't know if I remembered to mention that you have a great Austrian economics background, which I think for people who have studied that always carries a lot of weight. And again, I just love that okay, there's this stuff that happens, and some days we need to vent and be a little frustrated, and that's fine, but that you really focus this book on making it understandable and interesting to read. It's not, Tolstoy where like small print, and I mean, it's like a manual of different things that you can actually incorporate, find more information. So Dan, I sure appreciate you joining me on the show. Reminder to folks, you can hit those Twitter links. They're both in the description below. Share this interview, and Dan is going to pick 5 lucky winners to get a copy of the book, and sure appreciate that. And we'll look forward to checking in with the travels. I know you're leaving soon, and you'll be calling us from one of your first country locations next time.
Absolutely. It's great to be here, Chris. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Well, I appreciate you, Dan. I think you've been a role model for me, and I'm glad to have you on here and let other people benefit from that. So thank you.
Very kind.